Startup is a huge risk that might not work out for your career. I'm 5 years into my career now after I graduated from university, and I had a decent amount of experience working at startups and also observing people around me working for startups. And here is my honest review and an opinion about working for startups. But first, before I go into the bad and the ugly, let's review what tech startups are supposed to promise you in terms of advantages. They're supposed to be lots of growth opportunities because you are supposedly to have very fast career advancement and opportunities, and you're likely to wear many hats and broad skill sets. You can work on innovative projects and cutting edge technologies, and you have a very tight knit, strong culture between teams, and it can be more personable. And for equity, equity compensation could lead to financial gains. But this is on the condition that the startups actually is successful. As you may know, 99% of startups fail at any stages. It can go until like the last Series D rounds, and it can actually still fail. Now let's say that you're actually lucky enough to be in front of the startups that will be successful. There's still risk of them firing you to hire someone from big tech who's more established and have more years of experience, or they could just not hire you because you don't have the right brand name that they're looking for. And a lot of times startups make the mistake that they think they should hire someone from a big corporation to help them build a company. But that's where you go wrong, because in big companies, a lot of the skill sets are very focused towards one area. I'll tell you another example of my friends. These are real life examples. One person who worked for this company in Canada, and it reached like Series B already, and he started there for like 4 months, and then it became insolvent, and the founders like, yeah, the company's over, you can keep a laptop, but we're not going to be a company anymore. Second story is from this really smart person. He started off his career at Goldman Sachs, and he's joined the startup in New York, and it was supposed to be a very high brand name startup since everyone who worked there were from like big companies in like VP, directors level, and it was very well funded initially, but he worked there for 7 or 8 years and it didn't go anywhere. And even he told me that, yeah, like I was working for this startup, blah blah blah, and you might not recognize the name because after all those years it didn't really go anywhere. So it was really hard for him to go back to, like his traditional finance job. So he took a lot of loans and start over at 30 something, to go to his MBA at Wharton and recruit once again from scratch as if he was an undergraduate student to get into private equity or investment banking again. And that was the end of his startup career. But in startups, you're supposed to wear many hats. That means that these are a lot of skills that this person do not have, but the startups expect them to already have. And it is very challenging because it does apply a lot of pressure and stress on you when you're working there. Personally, for me, like my boss, when I was working for startups, wanted me to do data science for marketing, for tech, for backend, for full stack, for data engineering, for sales, for product, and would get upset at me if I struggle because it is difficult to handle all of that. So they also don't have a lot of money, right? So these growth opportunities are only if they're able to raise the next rounds. And a lot of times companies, when they have their first round of funding, they overspend and they're low on cash and they're not, profitable yet. And it's very hard to continue to the next round. And in order for a startup to reach the level of Meta or Microsoft or Google, is a 1 in a million chance. Like, the startup world is very brutal and it's very competitive. If you have this idea, maybe the big tech will already create something, or acquire you, or there's a competitor that is better than you. And these promises of fast career growth is only possible if the startup is actually expanding. But it might expand to a certain point, but due to different market conditions like increased interest rates, or if people no longer need the product because something else came about, it immediately destroys the product. And on your resume is now a failed company that has no brand name whatsoever. Although the skills might be applicable elsewhere, but it is also harder for you to find a job as compared to someone who might have come from Google, who've always had a stable and strong brand. In terms of culture, I think that the part where they say that you can form a close-knit team, that's only if you actually can get along with everyone. When a company has more than 2 people, the culture changes. It becomes political, and they for resources between each other. And assuming that you will definitely have a close-knit, strong culture is very presumptuous, because remember, startups don't really have a board of directors, are not really regulated, and don't have an HR team. So what does that mean? It means that it's the jungle rules. Anyone can say anything, and the CEO will be the determinant factor of what the culture is. And the company will embody the startup founder's personality. And some of them are very toxic. I have seen companies that have their CEO gather everyone just to yell at everyone for an hour or two and then tell them to work harder. And in the grand scheme of things, those salaries are very low with very minimal stock options, and those options might be worth nothing. So you're just ending up in a very abusive, toxic environment that might not have a positive return. And you might be wondering, what did you do all of that for? Well, and also for innovation and new technologies that they say, a lot of times you still need the same infrastructure from the large corporations that provide the cloud platforms, and these innovation technologies might not work. And the most prevalent example of that is Theranos. And why didn't Theranos work? Well, it's because it's literally impossible to work. So you do have lots of risk and instability. It can fail in the first few years and can impact job security. It is very imbalanced in work life, because you would work like a slave and really long hours, very challenging work with multiple hats for very low pay and with limited resources, meaning you have to do everything from scratch. That was my experience, and it might not work out for you financially. And you better hope your next job appreciate that experience. If they were going to choose between a person who works at Google or a person who works at a random startup who failed, it's probably not going to be you unless you're really lucky. But however, on a final note, I do want to share one success stories I know of someone who worked at a startup and become wildly successful. But this is a unique startup since it's spun out of like a very popular and famous science university in America. And it was from a research project with a professor, and it became a startup because of how impactful it is to the real world. And then that company got acquired, and everyone who was an early employee of that got paid out in lots of money. But if you think that this might be you, well, it is probably not, just statistically speaking, but you can be very lucky. Just not my case so far.